Well, good morning, church. How you doing today? All right. You're the second service. You're the awake crowd, right? No, you just get to chuckle. I expect you guys to be real loud this morning. It's going to be a great day. We're going to be very excited about what God is going to do in our lives because we are in week number 3 of this series called From the Ground Up, and we're talking about a guy named Nehemiah. And Nehemiah was a passionate, bold individual. And I think today in the verses we read, you're going to see someone who is very passionate, who's very bold, who knows what they stand for and how they walk out their life. And he's a guy that got a passion and a dream from God about rebuilding the city of Jerusalem because the city lies in ruins. And he doesn't even live in Jerusalem. He lives 800 miles away when God puts it upon his heart to make a difference in the lives of someone else. And so we as a church, we can identify with this, can't we? Because we love a neighborhood in the Dominican Republic. It's called La Barquita. You guys have heard me talk about them, right? See, we went on Christmas Eve of this last year, I kind of announced to you that the money you gave, just in general fund, we bought land. And it wasn't for us, it was for someone else. Because there's a school down there run by a church, and we partner with that church, we partner with that school, and right next to it, we bought the land, right next door to the school. And we raised enough money on Christmas Eve by itself to build the building there for a skills training center. Because this school goes through 8th grade, and we on our heart have a burden and a dream to make an impact in that neighborhood, La Barquita. And so we are building a skills training center. Because you can imagine the life that these kids have with an 8th grade education, living in a very poor part of the world, in a poor neighborhood in a poor part of the world. And their opportunities are very small. And so we as a church want to change their future. We want to give them hope once again by giving them a skill that they can pursue. And so we have this skills training center. So our goal right now is to outfit that skills training center with all the equipment they need, the tables to work on, the chairs to sit on, all of that kind of internal stuff. We have a goal of $25,000. We have almost $6,000 has come in already towards that goal. So by the end of this year, I would love it if we could open up the new year with this thing being dedicated. We could see God do great things down there, but it takes us banding together, just like Nehemiah got his people together. They rebuilt the city. We too want to help rebuild this neighborhood, and I believe it starts changing the fortunes and the futures of these kids. And so if you, God kind of puts that on your heart, ask him, God, what am I supposed to do to make a difference in somebody else's life? I would ask you to do that this morning, and at the end of service, you can make an impact in their life too, all right? So Nehemiah, I already told you he lives 800 miles away. He got a burden from God, and the burden didn't just cause him to think about the issue, didn't cause him to dream about the issue, but it caused him to take action on the issue. He heard that the people of Israel, and in particular the city of Jerusalem, was lying in ruins, that the people were disgraced, that the walls were torn down and the gates were burned. And so he took it upon himself to make a difference. He didn't go to the king and say, hey, could you send someone? He says, send me. Check it out here in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse number 4. It says this, and the king said to me, what is it you want? Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, let him send me. Not send someone else. Not send your best architects or laborers or your army or generals or anything. No. Let him send me. It's my calling. It's my purpose. It's my dream. Send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried so that I can rebuild it. He has found great favor with the king, and the king says, "What's your dream?" And he says, "My dream is for God to use me to rebuild this city." And so he journeys to this new city, the city Jerusalem, the city where his ancestors are buried, the city where the walls lie in ruins, and he surveys the land. And we've learned about this in the last couple weeks of the series, right? And he sees that the walls are burned down, so he rallies together the people, and shoulder to shoulder they work. They begin to put that wall back together, and person by person, taking each section of the wall. The priests start first, and the laborers are next, and the guy who has a house in the wall builds that section of the wall, and the goldsmith is here, and the perfumer is there, and the guy with his daughters are building on this section of the wall, and everybody takes their section, and it's a beautiful look at how God's people can work together to accomplish something great, shoulder to shoulder. And as they begin to build this wall, the wall is coming up, it's starting to become finished. Nehemiah faces opposition. Have you ever had a dream and faced opposition in the midst of that dream? Have you ever tried to accomplish something and you faced opposition on your journey to accomplish that something? Well, you're not alone. Nehemiah felt that too. And in Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 1, we get to read this. It says, When word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, the Arab, and the rest of our enemies. So these are not people that get along with Nehemiah, right? You don't call someone an enemy if they're your best friend or if they're allies. They're enemies. They do not like Nehemiah. That I had rebuilt the wall, and not a gap was left in it. So the wall is complete, though up to that time I had not set the doors on the gates. Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, let's meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. Now, this scenario, if you are looking at it purely from a standpoint of how do I get the most out of this situation, you have an enemy, they want to attack you, because this was the days where like, I don't like you, my army's going to attack your army, and you better defend yourself, and we're going to fight it out, right? This is what's happening here. If they say, hey, we want to meet ahead of time, typically this is where you would talk about it, talk about peace, talk about borders, talk about territories, talk about paying tribute, whatever it is. In anybody's scope of war, ending in peace before the war begins is a good idea, isn't it? Where you can talk about it. Where you can say, okay, we don't want to lose the lives of our soldiers or our men or our people. We want to save the money, the resources, and the effort that come from battle. They want to sit down and they want to talk. And the premise of this talk is peace. Do I talk peace with these people? And Nehemiah thinks about it, but he decides that this is nothing more than a distraction. Because his goal, his calling, was to rebuild the city, not to make peace with everyone else. You guys see that? And so Nehemiah says it's just a distraction. When you are chasing the dream that God has for you, there are a lot of distractions that'll come your way. Have you noticed that? There's a lot of distractions. And by the way, let me time out. If you weren't here in week number 1, I got to tell you this. You have a dream from God. And you may be going, well, yeah, TJ, that's where you're wrong. I do not have a dream from God. No, I believe God has a dream for you, a purpose and a calling for your life. You might not yet know what it is, but I believe that you were created on purpose. I believe that you are not an accident, and I believe that God has an ultimate plan for your life. And your job is to find out what that is. And many of us have a dream. Many of us have a plan. We have a calling, but maybe it's gone dormant. Maybe distractions have taken us away from that plan. But I believe every single person in this room right now, under the sound of my voice, God has something for you, a dream for you, just like Nehemiah. And Nehemiah comes to this moment and he has a distraction. He has something pulling him away. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about 3 distractions to Nehemiah. And we're going to just go through chapter 6. We're going to look at these distractions kind of one by one and how you can combat or push back against these distractions just like Nehemiah did, okay? So number 1, the first distraction that Nehemiah faces is opportunities. Opportunities. Quite often, the greatest threat to your dream becoming a reality is not the direct opposition to your dream, but the opportunities that distract you from your dream. Does that make sense? Or there's that old phrase, good is the enemy of great. You ever hear that before? Because there are a lot of good things in the world, but only one of them is your calling. There are a lot of good things that you could be doing. The world is full of good things. There's good hobbies, there's good entertainment, there's good business opportunities, there's good this, there's good that, there's a lot of good stuff in the world, but not everything that is good is from God. And not everything that is good will ultimately lead you to the destination that God has for you. So you must decide, is this a good thing or is this a great thing? Will this good thing take me to the destiny that I know God has for me, or will it lead me astray? Is it just a distraction? So I've got a chart for you guys. I want to show you. Come on, let's bring that up real quick. Now, if you are really into graphs and charts and stuff, you're going to be really disappointed, okay? Because basically these numbers on here are completely arbitrary. They have no meaning whatsoever. I just wanted a chart with 2 lines, okay? That's all I wanted. And so what I'm going to do today is not get really detailed into graphs. So if you're a type C personality, very administrative in your gifting, please ignore any loopholes in this illustration, okay? You guys ready for this? Okay. Now, if we talk about financials in our life, there are some things that we invest in and they grow. Like, who here has ever spent money before? Right? Okay, good. Okay, so you have invested your money into something. Every time you spend money, you are investing it. Maybe I invested in a good meal. Maybe I invested in a car or a house. Maybe I invested in the stock market. Whatever it is, I invest. Every dollar that I have is invested. Some investments are better than others. Wouldn't you agree? Some investments, they start here, but over the course of time, they keep growing and they keep adding in value. And so generally speaking, over like the 30-year long haul, if you invest in like a mutual fund or some kind of stock that's kind of good, it'll keep growing over the lifetime. Does that make sense to everybody? Here in Sarasota, generally speaking, if you buy real estate and 30 years later, it's almost always, not every time, almost always, 30 years later, it's going to be more valuable. Does that make sense? But there are some things that you buy and immediately they're no longer worth that much. If you buy a brand new car, what happens? As soon as those tires hit the road in front of you, out of that lot of the dealership, guess what you did? You just lost about 25% of your money right there. Just hit, oh man, that was the most costly mile in any car ever, right? And so it just goes down. And over the course of time, that investment becomes more and more expensive, and eventually you lose that money. Does that make sense? Now, that's not saying you shouldn't buy a car, right? Because cars are good. You need cars to survive and get to work and take your kids to school and go on vacation, whatever it is. But it's not a great long-term investment, is it? What about a boat? I want a boat. Anybody else want a boat? I want a boat, you know? But here's the deal. As soon as you buy that boat, guess what's going to happen? Boo! The value eventually will become almost nothing. People are giving away boats that they don't even want anymore. Like they're just garbage. You know what BOAT stands for? BOAT? Break out another 1,000. That's what it stands for. Boats cost money all the time. The minimum you're going to spend on that sucker is $1,000 to $2,000 every year just to keep it up, okay? So there are some financial investments that will grow over time. They will bear great returns. There's some financial investments that decrease in value over time. Now, if you take this same principle and you apply it to other areas of your life, you can actually begin to see that some things are good, but they don't end up being great. And some things are good, and they do end up being great. Now, if I were speaking to someone who is married or engaged or dating or maybe one day wants to be married, engaged, or dating, okay? Anyone like that, if you want to make that relationship healthy, there are some investments you can make here that 30 years down the road, your marriage will be better for, right? Like make sure you are living godly values out in that relationship. Make sure you take time to date your spouse, to go out, spend time together, talk with one another. Counseling is really important for a lot of relationships, to make sure you have a third party kind of helping you work through some things. Like it helps you grow, and these investments over the long term will bear a lot of results. Now, there are some other things that are just distractions. So if you take that business opportunity, it's a good thing. But if it means you have to be away from your spouse for too long, what happens? The investment is good, but in the long term, it's not great. Does that make sense? You can do the same thing with your kids. I'm very serious with the way we raise our kids because I believe that my calling in life with my kids is to raise kids not that are happy, but that are healthy, that they are kids who love God, that they contribute to society, find their dream and their calling from God, and I want to literally unleash them into the world to change this world. That's my calling as a parent. So there are things that I need to do that need to invest here and not here. Now, there's a lot of good things you can do with your kids. Like my kids are in clubs after school. They participate in the activities. They have all kinds of things going on. They're in student council, and one of them's in like an improv thing, whatever. Okay, and so they have all these activities. But you know what? In 30 years, there will be some benefit to those things. It's a good thing, but it does not bring me to my great thing. My great thing is having them love God, find his purpose for their life, and then live it out. That is what I want. So there are some things that are good that are actually just distractions from the great that God has planned for them. Does that make sense? So if I take the time here and now, that when I am home eating dinner with them and I have a relationship with them, that's important, just to be home with them. It's important that when I put them to bed at night, this is one of our values. We read a Bible story or we do a devotion with our kids every night. Right? Like we always do that. Why? Because I know that if I do it in year 1 and year 30, it's still going to be paying dividends. We don't miss church. We go on vacation and we go to church because we instill in the value of our kids. Learning from God, worshiping God, encountering God in his word will only ever return a greater value in their life. Does that make sense to you guys? And you could apply this to 1,000 different areas of your life. Not just financial, not just relational, but you could do it with opportunities that you have, callings that you have. But here's the deal. Every decision you make, you must say, does this bring me closer to the dream that God has for me? Or is it just a good that is keeping me from my great? Does that make sense? This is true for all of us. It doesn't matter what phase of life you're in. It doesn't matter if you have a lot or if you have a little. All of us have opportunities that come our way that are really just distractions from the great things that God is calling you to. Nehemiah saw this. When he was working on the wall, they said, hey, come and meet with us. Come on down to the plain of Ono. And he said, oh no. I had to do it. I'm not going down to those plains and villages to meet with you. Look what he says exactly in chapter 6, verse 2. He says this, but they were scheming to harm me. They didn't want peace. So I sent messengers to them with this reply, I am carrying on a great project and can't go down. There was an opportunity there that could be good, but instead he chose the great thing instead of the good thing. We must never confuse good and great. The great thing is the thing God has called you to. The great thing is the thing that is paying dividends for 30 years. There are a lot of good things, and it's okay to have good things, to do good things, but do not do them at the expense of the great thing that God has called you to. And then he says,